Texas. I'm Deb Goodrich.
And I'm Michelle Martin.
And today we're going to start off with historic food. And right behind me is my favorite food, and that would be oysters. I think I could do without anything the rest of my life except oysters. And a lot of people don't realize how popular that oysters were in the 19th century, despite all the challenges and shipping and harvesting those little guys. They were really, really popular.
Deb, in England, actually, in the 19th century, in England, oysters were actually a street food, and it was considered a very cheap and nutritious source of protein. And that was something that folks who are on the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder could afford more than they could poultry or beef. So, oysters definitely popular, and behind me you see various bottles of 19th century beverages and some drinking cups, because let's face it folks, in the 19th century sometimes you were better off drinking the beer, the wine, the ale, the porter, or the stout than you were the water. So let's raise a glass to 19th century alcohol.
Champagne. Champagne was
Ooh,
huge. Out on the
yes.
plains, you're always reading those accounts. Of course, the famous one near me here in Oakley is the account of the great buffalo hunting competition between Buffalo Bill Cody and Medicine Bill Comstock. And of course, Cody won that day, according to it may just be one account of this big fight, but I do believe that there were some champagne bottles and oyster shells found at um, the where close to where that fight was supposed to have culminated. So, always celebrating with champagne and oysters. And it's funny because I grew up, in Virginia, so Chesapeake Bay oysters, huge,
Hmm.
and we had uh, on special occasions, like we would go out for a birthday, one of our birthdays, and it would always be to the seafood restaurant. But we just were so fortunate to have friends who lived on the coast. And when we would go down to Jacksonville, North Carolina, and visit our friends down there, we'd have oyster shuckins. And they would have bushel baskets of oysters. We would steam them in the backyard and eat those with crackling cornbread. And they had been doing that down there for centuries. That was nothing new. They had been harvesting oysters right there, and like I said, up and down the East Coast for, as long as people had lived there. And it remains a delicacy to this day. I've enjoyed oysters at the Union Bay Oyster House in Boston not too long ago and watched the guys shuck them right there. And we used to bring home paper sacks of oysters from Jacksonville, just of, raw oysters, and put them in the freezer. We just set the whole sack of oysters in the freezer. And when we got ready to eat some, just steam them. And people in the 19th century on the plains at the forts, you can find pits of oyster shells at
Hmm.
almost every one of the forts. I know Fort Leavenworth, they found tons of oyster shells, but all over the West in those Western forts and Western towns.
Well, it's interesting because we tend to think of processed foods, canned foods, as
Right.
something that's a 20th century invention. But, we find at these historic forts as well the remnants of the tin cans the food were coming in. And so we find, whether it be beer bottles, wine bottles, other kinds of bottles for alcohol, but we also find the tin cans, what's left of them from different prepared foods that were coming west. And it made life so much easier if you were the officer's wife at Fort Leavenworth or Fort Scott or Fort Gibson down in the Indian Territory. It made your life a whole lot easier to have some things that were canned and preserved that could make that trip, and made it easier for you, especially if you were not used to the change in the growing seasons, to be able to have fresh produce. So you're getting, canned items. And we find a lot of that in the archaeological digs we do at the fort sites.
Leo Oliva, our good friend Leo Oliva, did a talk the other night on food on the Santa Fe Trail, and he gave, throughout the years, several lists of items that traders would pack and take with them, and of course there were sacks of beans, sacks of flour, and cornmeal, molasses, all those good things, and they didn't. Packing on the wagons, they didn't get a lot of delicacies, but there were staples, and they would have flour, of course, and then some kind of leavening that they would take with them, but pretty basic. And they ate beans almost every day. But going back to what you said about the canned food, Leo was talking about the popularity of sardines, and you could just
Yeah.
about follow the trail from the empty sardine cans that had been tossed along the way. And we, just don't think about sardines like we eat today. Pick up a can of sardines, and they did the same thing back then. And that was a food of convenience, and had some protein and some fat in it, with the oil, and yeah, they were really really popular.
Deb, when I was researching the Prairie Table Cookbook that I had the great fortune to co author with Bill Curtis, we were looking at the history of 19th century food. And in particular, we looked at, what were Native people eating west of the Mississippi, and then what did the Army bring with them, and what were they eating? But then we looked at homesteaders and simple folk. We looked at ranches. We looked at chuck wagons and beans, different kinds of beans, rice,
Mhm.
biscuits, and salt pork come up the most in the foodstuff lists, and also coffee.
Oh yeah.
Those are like the main staples that you see in everybody's lists of what they had at home, what they had on the chuck wagon, what they had on the trail, and I'm always really interested to see how people become creative. And during the territorial period in Kansas, I love some of the letters the women write back to their families or their diaries where they talk about how they were able to make pancakes without milk, or they were able to make them without eggs or different ingredients that they didn't have, and how they became extremely resourceful in times when they didn't have what they needed. Amazing what people will find to substitute, which is no different than what we do today. If you live a gluten free or a low carb kind of lifestyle, you make swaps, riced cauliflower instead of rice. Um, so it's really fascinating to me to see. We think a lot of the things we're doing today and how we swap and substitute things in our diet is something new and novel, but it's not. Women west of the Mississippi have been doing this for decades.
Well, one of the things that you reminded me of, some of those things that have been around, like Worcestershire sauce. We find all kinds of those
Mm-hmm.
bottles. William Perrins. We find those bottles in the dump at Wallace, at Fort Wallace. And then talking about the can, the evaporated milk.
Mm-hmm.
Evaporated milk was being sold, and we might as well put in a plug for the Steamboat Arabia while we're at it,
Oh,
because you
yes.
wonder, what they were shipping, and you go in and see those canned foods and canned pickles, canned peaches, and
Yes.
those peaches and fruits, especially if you're crossing the prairies, the fruits are really missing in your diet, and so many people in the East, I mean, even in Missouri by
Yes.
1821, they had fruit trees, they'd planted orchards. So those fruits, people were just dying for those fruits, literally. And one of my favorite scenes in a movie is with Gary Cooper and Melody Jones. And that cowboy comes in off of the range, and he goes straight into the store, and he's not buying whiskey, he's not buying beer, he's buying a can of peaches. And he
Mhm.
opens that can with his knife, and he's walking down that board sidewalk taking his knife and dipping those peaches out. And Michael Brower, my good friend at the in Oklahoma at the Western Heritage Center, we were talking about how that was far more realistic than a cowboy walking into the saloon. That he was going to go
Yeah.
to the store and get that canned fruit because he was so hungry for that. And it's just one of my favorite scenes. One, somehow they nailed that one. It was just, but you go into the Arabia and you see
Oh,
all those canned foods that they were carrying. It's
yeah.
incredible.
I mean, asparagus and beans and different kinds of canned meat. We tend to think of spam and things as a more of a modern invention, but they were canning different kinds of meat, canning, in some cases, canning like major portions of the chicken, pig's feet, pickled pig's feet, pickled eggs. That's the one that gets me when you're looking at the Arabia, pickled eggs, asparagus. So things that we would never probably imagine they had in the 19th century. It's showing up on those manifests of those steamboats taking all of those goods up and down the rivers. And, you know, when they found the Arabia, the amount of information we were able to gain as historians into people's material culture and what people were buying is just tremendous. And let's face it, from a museum standpoint, it makes some of the most incredible displays and exhibits when you walk in and see all of that. Um, and you see just what people's tastes were like in the time period.
And the Arabia, for those that aren't familiar, sank going up the Missouri River in 1856. So it's like the museum there in Kansas City, it's in the city market area, is like walking into Walmart 1856.
Yeah.
Everything, dishes, buttons, needles, shoes, hats, fabric, tools, perfume,
Perfume,
everything, every
jewelry.
Walmart 1856. It's just incredible. It's
It
a
is.
world treasure.
It is. It's amazing because, and all what one of the things that I love about that particular museum and what it helps us do is put to bed the notion that people were wearing very dark and dour colors in the time period. Because when you look at the fabric, when they did the conservation in the fabric, some of the fabric for the men's and women's clothing, the paisleys, the plaids, but the almost neon colors, the chartreuses, the magentas, these bright, vivid colors, it really helps bring 19th century people and their taste to life. And I actually have a bottle. They started reproducing one of the perfumes that they found on the Arabia, and you can buy the perfume. It does not smell the best by our modern standards, but for the time period, it was quite the bee's knees. And so I have a bottle of Steamboat Arabia perfume. Um, and we get this really great insight into people and really looking at what people ate tells us a lot about everything, about their personalities, about their access to different kinds of foodstuffs in different parts of the country, but also our socioeconomic levels that people are living and working at. You know, it gives you a really great indicator of what's going on.
When I was a kid, I loved reading the fairy tales and the stories, and I wanted the foods like porridge. You know, make me some porridge. I want to see what Miss Muffet was eating. You know, on sitting on her tuffet. What was porridge like? And the same with history. You know, I've always wanted to taste what they were tasting, and it's the same thing we do on vacation. You go to a different city, and you want to taste
Mm-hmm.
what their food is there, and so that's a great part of history for me is going back and tasting what they tasted, you know, and how did they season things and what flavors did they use. You know, cloves were very popular in the
Yes.
19th century, not as much today, but like mulled cider, you know, with cloves and cinnamon
Mhm.
and all those things, and just the different spices that were really popular then that may have fallen out of favor now. I've often said if um, one of these days, you know, the currency of the world will probably be cloves. It is just such an incredible spice, and
Yes.
so pungent and so unique that one of these days it's going to be as valuable as gold, I predict. Write that one down, people.
Yes, we will. You know, Deb, when I was doing living history at Little House on the Prairie Museum, one of the things I did quite often was open pit, open hearth cooking.
Right.
And so I would go ahead and be sitting in the cabin and I would be chopping my vegetables and prepping while I had a fire going outside and I had my tripod and my pot hanging with my water and my spices, and then I would put the meat in to boil the meat for the stew. And it was always interesting because people were very interested. They were less interested in what actual vegetables were going in, but they were more interested in the spices. And I used to actually, with the mortar and pestle, I would grind up cloves.
Hmm.
And so I would grind up the cloves and then I'd throw a little bit of sage and salt and pepper and throw it into the pot. And then, even with a stew, I would take a cinnamon stick and throw in and get that flavor all in there. And people were always astounded. They say, cinnamon and clove in your stew? And I said,
Right.
well, yeah, I'm actually looking at, I have a recipe that a woman wrote in her diary for her stew, and she put these items in the water when it was getting hot and boiling before she put her meat in. And she would go ahead after a certain point in time and fish out that cinnamon stick and then put the vegetables in and let them cook. And it was great because it was very aromatic.
Yeah.
It gave you this warm, comfortable feel, and it tasted wonderful. It had this rich, deep, complex flavor that you just don't get in a lot of our foods today. And if you look in my spice cupboard, really in some ways is more 19th century than it is 21st. I have a lot of allspice and clove and sage and cardamom and cinnamon and other things, anise, star anise, other things that were very popular then.
Yeah, it's really interesting to go back and look at those things. And I had a couple of pictures I thought about using. We did at Fort Wallace a couple of Christmases ago. I kind of recreated what an officer's Christmas dinner would have been, and they
Mm-hmm.
would have pulled out all the stops at Christmas and, with cakes and cookies and different things that they just didn't have most of the year. And it's just so much fun. So yeah, let's all go create a historic meal. Doesn't that sound like fun?
Well, I've done that quite often, doing living history, and it's great fun. It's a lot of work, but it's really worth it in the end because you get these incredible flavors, and it does help transport you and help you begin to understand how people lived in a different time period and by tasting that food and sampling it.
Well, one of the things that people did to provide for their tables back in the 19th century and some today was hunting. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about hunting. Stay with us.
In 1821, a trade route was opened from Missouri in the United States across prairies and mountains to Mexico. In 2021, we will mark 200 years of epic conflicts and grand adventures, larger-than-life personalities, and sweeping landscapes. Join us on an historic journey. The Santa Fe Trail lives on.
Find us on social media or santafetrail.org. Welcome to the Western Kansas Wildlife Travel Center, right here in my hometown of Oakley, Kansas. We're the front door of Western Kansas, located on 3 main highways, I-70, US 83, and US 40. And all those roads lead to history, beautiful scenery, and adventure, no matter which direction you go. We now have an IHOP. That brand that you've trusted up and down the road in all your travels is staffed with local folks, real people just like you and me, and we're waiting on you to join us. So for fun, adventure, fuel up, fuel your body, and let's have some fun.
I'm Michelle Martin.
And I'm Deb Goodrich. And today we're going to talk about deer hunting because season is opening. You know what? I was just looking. I've been reading the dates. It's so complicated. I can't even begin to figure it out. So basically, deer season starts in September. So visit the Kansas Department of Wildlife Parks and Tourism to get exactly the dates for whatever you're using. If you're using a muzzle loader or a bow and arrow or a gun of another kind other than muzzle loaders, you better check and see. Don't depend on me to tell you about it. And I'm sure a lot of you guys are already have your license, already have your plans, already have your rooms reserved or your camping spots and are ready to go. But deer season is big business in Kansas. It's not just fun, it brings a lot of dollars into the state. And I want to give a shout out. This photo behind me, isn't that awesome? That's from the Topeka Capital Journal, newspaper in our capital city. So I just thought that was the coolest image.
Behind me, I have obviously we have a buck in the woods, and I think this one's probably hoping it does not find itself on the other end of the rifle or the bow and arrow or the muzzle loader. But Deb, I grew up in a family with several individuals who enjoyed hunting. My grandpa Roy, in particular, if it ran, if it would fly, if it swam, he was after it.
Yeah.
And deer hunting season was one of his absolute favorites. And I can remember many times going over to my grandparents' house, and Grandpa would come home, and if he had a big smile on his face, we knew he'd gotten a deer. If he didn't, if he was grumpy, we knew he had missed out. So but deer hunting season was always a big part of our family life with my grandfather, and I never went hunting growing up. As a matter of fact, I never went hunting until I moved to Kansas. And when I taught at Fort Scott Community College, a coworker of mine at the time, Dale Hunkley, went ahead and asked if I wanted to try deer hunting. And I said, sure. And so we went deer hunting. And actually, while we were out, he actually shot the deer. I was there with him, but we got a deer. And I think he was concerned that when it came time for hanging it up and gutting and processing, that I would toss my cookies. And when I didn't, he was pleasantly surprised. And then, sadly, folks, we ground Bambi up into burger and back straps and other lovely things that made mighty fine eating.
Well, I grew up in a family full of hunters too, and one of my uncles actually built bows and arrows, built rifles, and I'm not talking about from a kit, I'm talking about from scratch. He actually had the metal lathe and the whole 9 yards. So yeah, I grew up in with some pretty proficient hunters. So they I can't honestly remember a time they ever came home empty-handed. They were pretty cool. Daddy would hunt occasionally. He never came back empty-handed either when he would go out. And the most fun, though, was when we would go on them with the scouting trips, the recon, when they were going looking for deer before season started. And where I grew up in Virginia, they would go up on the James River down the valley of Virginia, so north of us. And we would have a cookout there on the banks of the James River. And it's the first time I ever recall hearing a buck. There were these rocky cliffs on the other side, and you could hear the buck up there snorting and carrying on, and it's like, holy moly, and it echoed off the rock cliffs, and it was, wow, it was really, really cool. So yeah, a lot of trophies on the walls back home.
Well, Deb, it's interesting because we tend to think, now it's not quite so it's more common for women to go out and hunt.
Oh, sure.
We have a lot of women who shoot competitively, but also hunt. In the 19th century, we tend to think about women hunting as something maybe a little odd or unusual. But at Fort Scott in particular, Charlotte Swords, whose husband, Captain Thomas Swords, was the post architect and commander. And one of her letters, she writes that she has a bow and arrow in the hall at the ready, because if a bison or a deer or some game animal of some kind ambles itself across the parade ground, she's going to grab that and run out and get her and bag herself, a bison or a deer. And she was very keen. And actually, a lot of the officers' wives would go out on the hunting parties with their husbands. And, Libby Custer in particular, when they're at Fort Hays, she goes out in the ambulance and they go out on the buffalo hunt. And so I think it's interesting that we have a long, deep connection with hunting, especially in Kansas. And some of the best hunting areas in Kansas are in southeast Kansas, especially Chautauqua County. Is so well known for its excellent areas for hunting. And so, folks, if you haven't made your reservations for places to stay for your hunting in southeast Kansas, y'all better get on that right away, because every place fills up very quickly.
Well, they do out here too, in western Kansas. And of course, if you go into Mittens, the Western Kansas Wildlife Travel Center, during hunting season, you can see evidence. All those guys in camo sitting around the table before they head out. But yeah, a lot of folks rent out rooms to hunters. The hotels are full. So yeah, if you don't have your reservation, you may be out of luck already. You may be sleeping on the ground, waiting for that deer to come by.
Well, Deb, I say, it's hunting season in Kansas when you stop at a gas station and there's a sign on the gas pump that says, "No deer guts in trash can, please." So you definitely know it's hunting season in Kansas when you see those signs.
Yeah, for sure. I was just watching this the other day. Darren Knight, the comedian that plays the Southern Mama, he has the funniest episode where he goes hunting with his, husband, and he's trying to be quiet, and he's like sitting there whining about everything. I'm cold. I want to go to Walmart. Just, oh my gosh, it's hilarious. So if you haven't seen Darren Knight's hunting segment, you got to look that up. The Southern Mama, he's hilarious, just hilarious. But again, just want to remind you of deer season coming up. If you don't live in Kansas and you've never hunted here, check it out, because we got some amazing whitetail. We got some incredible mule deer. Some awful big racks out there waiting to be taken. So,
well, I have friends from Michigan who come all the way to Kansas for hunting season. And they say that's how phenomenal it is. So again, to our Kansas hunters, boy, don't let the out-of-staters get the jump on you, because they are quickly learning all of the best places to hunt, the greatest places to stay, and all of the fine restaurants to eat in.
That's for sure. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Howdy, I'm Seth Hayes, and welcome to my hometown, from then to now. Council Grove has a rich history as deep as the prairie tallgrass. Spend the day visiting 25 historic sites, or explore the unique shops and restaurants, or mosey out of town along the Santa Fe Trail. You all visit my hometown, Council Grove, in the heart of the Flint Hills.
Okay, looks like it's time for our tour. Welcome to the Fort Wallace Museum. Here at the museum, you're going to find some really interesting stuff, like our replica stagecoach from the Butterfield Overland Dispatch. We've got facades from the fort buildings. We've got an 1870s flag. There's a plesiosaur that was discovered locally. We've got the Ray pump organ collection. We're a little bitty place with a great big story, and we'd love to have you.
Welcome back. And you can see we've got some pretty fine automobiles behind us. We were just talking about deer season. Now we're talking about car season. It is car show season. And right behind me, this Bonneville belongs to my friend Les Glenn. We worked together in radio for a while and have been buddies ever since. And yeah, he is pretty proud of that ride right there.
Well, Deb, behind me is my little brother's Camaro, his RS Z28. And this was a father-son project that he and my dad worked on for several years. And they brought this beauty back to life from the ground up. And this is actually at home in Michigan.
That's gorgeous. That's really pretty. And of course, people, if you have a ride that sweet, you want to show it off. So that's what folks do at the car shows. They show off those smooth rides for all the world to see, and people can go. They have to keep towels handy to wipe the drool away when people come by some of those vehicles. And I was going to share a picture. Maybe we can slip this in the episode somewhere. Dixie Lee Jackson, if you remember her, my close relative, actually posed for a picture in this Bonneville, and it was it turned out really good. It's one of my favorite pictures. So what a backdrop for a photo. Every one of these is
I know. Deb, I think Americans have we have love affairs with our vehicles. And especially our classic vehicles. When I was growing up, my first car was a 1966 Corvair. And it was fantastic. I don't care what Ralph Nader said. When you live in Michigan and you drive in the winter, having the engine in the rear gave you a lot of weight in the back end, and you could plow through just about anything in the winter. My friends, their cars, they'd be stuck in the ditch, and I would be cruising on down the road in my Corvair. I grew up riding in a 1969 Chevelle SS 396 that my dad still owns today. My brother has his Camaro. I had a Mustang at one time. So I think Americans, more than any other people on the planet, have intense connections to their cars, and they run deep through our families, through the generations.
Oh, they do. My first car was a 68 Buick Skylark. Ooh. And when that thing quit running, it had way over 300,000 miles on it. I think the only thing Daddy ever did was put a fuel pump in it, or a water pump. He put a water pump in it one time, and that was about it. That doggone car was incredible. It's just incredible. And yeah, I drove that back and forth to school, and it was hot stuff. I'm telling you. My sister had a Torino. It was a dark blue Torino, and I'm telling you what, that was a muscle car. You could drag that car and beat just about any of the guys with that one. Pretty amazing. Though Daddy did say about us one time, he said that our vehicles should be on display in Detroit, because they were the only cars he'd ever seen that could run without gas, oil, water. They were miraculous. It was amazing.
Yes. Deb, in my hometown in Michigan, in Galesburg, Michigan, the former Ford dealership, when it went defunct, it sat empty for a long time, and a gentleman purchased it a few years ago, and he's kind of restored it. And what he does every Tuesday night in the summer up through Labor Day, he has a cruise-in. My dad happened to run by the cruise-in last night, and he said there were over 150 classic cars there in town, and literally they pull in, they set up, and they hang out in their lawn chairs. They listen to music. The gentleman sets up a food tent. They have food, and they just get out and they enjoy fellowship with one another. And that's what I love about car show season is, yes, looking at all the cars, because let's face it, I'm a car girl. Grew up in a car family. I had no choice. But I love to go look at the cars. I love seeing the passion that everyone puts into their restorations or whether they're doing a resto mod. Um, love looking at what they've done with their vehicles and how much how much the vehicles mean to them and the memories they have connected to them.
Oh, you're right. And you never see an unhappy person at the car show. I mean,
No.
everybody's happy. And we've got some pretty cool ones coming up. Michelle, talk about what's coming up on the 14th, because honestly, that's cut off on my page.
Well, in Kansas, we have a great car show season. And on August 14th, there are a couple of great shows you can pick up. One is in Liberal, Kansas, and it's the VFW Post 3166. And it is the Support Our Troops car show. Woo-hoo! And so they go from about 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. Also on the 14th, you can go going retro at Pomona State Park in Vassar. And so they not only are doing retro cars, but also vintage camping trailers as well.
That is so cool. And I've got a lot of friends there at Pomona and Vassar, Bonnie Warner, Dave and Kim Hauser, all you guys, I'm sure you'll be out there. Would love to come and see you. Now on the 20th and 21st of August, the Pratt City Fire Department Cruise and Show. And this is the 9th annual cruise and show for the Pratt City Fire Department. So I don't care where you are in the state, there is a show close to you. You know, Salina just had the big one a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't get to go to the show, but I was in and out of Salina a lot that weekend, and it didn't matter where you were, the cars were everywhere. You know, everywhere you went to eat, just up and down the streets. It was awesome. They had maybe 2,000. I mean, it was something crazy. I don't know. Maybe I'm making that up. I could just be making that up. And then also 21st and 22nd. Tell them about that one, Michelle.
Well, if you have not been to Scott City and to Lake Scott on the August 21st and 22nd, the Lake Scott Car Show and Big Buck Poker Run. And so you can go ahead and go to Scott City Park and enjoy all of the amazing vehicles. And if that isn't enough for you, if you can try to go back and forth between places, also on the 21st, you can go to one of my favorite towns in the Flint Hills, Alma, and go to Hot Alma Nights. Because let's face it, folks, Saturday night was the night to cruise town, was it not? Up and down the main drag. And in Alma, you can go ahead and take in the cars and, oh, please, go take in Alma cheese and the pie and the wonderful food and that Flint Hills community.
And then maybe you can sneak over to Wamego and pick up some wine to go with your Alma cheese.
Exactly. But make sure somebody else drives your classic car if you've had a little too much witch in a ditch.
For sure. Also on the 21st, I'm telling you what, the 21st, that weekend's going to be a really tough one. The Potluck Car Show. And the annual car show features pre-1978 cars, trucks, and motorcycles. All vehicles 1979 and newer will be allowed if they approve of you. So, it's all vetted, and so I bet there's going to be a lot of people pleading with them to let them in and making the case for their vehicles after 1979. Of course, those things are, classic is getting later and later now. It's just like me, antique is getting a lot younger than I thought it would be. And then August 25th and 28th, the Boss Nationals in Marysville. And Marysville, the true Boss Mustang and Cougar cars. How cool is that? Talk about the muscle vehicles. That's where they're going to be. And again, it's so cool. You go from Scott Lake, which is gorgeous, to Marysville, which is gorgeous, to all these pretty parts of the state when there's not pretty. Alma, it's all the little,
gorgeous
fences through there in the Flint Hills, and just so many pretty places. And things are pretty green this summer. Starting to get some dry weather now, but they've been pretty green. So maybe it'll be a greener August than normal and
Yeah.
down to be really pretty. Okay, so the end of the month, what we got going on then?
Well, on August 28th in Wakefield, we have the Wakefield Birthday Bash and Car Show in Wakefield, Kansas. And you can register in the morning between 9 and noon. And they say it will happen rain or shine, but you can bring in motorcycles, Fords, Chevys, Mopars, Pontiacs, Corvettes, street rods, and they also have a parade. And if you are so inclined, a beard and mustache competition. And I'm sorry, but you know what? If you're driving a Model T or a Model A, if you've got something that goes back that far, I would expect to see the stash action going on too, folks.
A little handlebar going on there. That would be
Exactly.
perfect. So no matter where you are coming up this late summer and fall, there's going to be a car show near you. So make sure you take advantage of it. Let folks know how you found out about it, and let them know how pretty you think those vehicles are, because they just live to hear praise. Isn't that a fact, Michelle?
Yes, they do. As a matter of fact, my brother, he loved it when both of my nephews absolutely square with the right if Daddy takes them for a ride in the Marrow, as my one nephew called it, not Camaro, the Marrow. He always says, I want Daddy's Marrow, and loved to go for rides in it and hear my brother burn a little rubber. And so, yeah.
Oh, that's pretty cool. All right, folks, no matter where you are this summer, hope to run into you somewhere. And in the meantime, I'm Deb Goodrich.
I'm Michelle Martin.
And we shall see you somewhere
Around
Kansas.
Kansas.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.